I'll introduce Dina and Medical Legal Partnership while we pull up the slides. So I've been working with Dina since I was an intern here at KKV in 2008 when she and Chris Duroff, David's brother, founded the MLPC here in Hawaii. And so we always joke that I grew up with MLP because I was like a baby doctor. And so the MLP practice is ingrained in me from really early on. And so I've always said, like, I can never practice without a lawyer. So I'm just going to stay with Dina forever. And this slide, this is how I feel every day in clinic. And I know all of you feel very similarly in our roles where we like have the medical issues and we think, yay, we did it. We fixed it. We fixed that problem. But then the family is actually struggling with so much more. And at KKV, we all know that health is way more than just the physical. So MLP really speaks to that. So if you haven't met Dina yet, she is our director, our legal director, and she's on faculty at William S. Richardson School of Law. And her two staff attorneys are doing another presentation today for KKV, so they're not here, but hopefully you will meet them at some point. So there's Fernando Cosio and Deja, who is, Fernando's like our main KKV one, but Deja also helps a lot, and she's super good at housing, like homelessness advocacy, as well as women's rights, and I would say also like benefits are her like really, and vital docs. Well, she's good at like a lot of things. But anyway, okay. Oh, they went too large. Yeah, sorry. Tony's interrupting me. Okay, so anyway, I'm gonna hand it over to Dina and mute myself.
Thank you all. I know for a lot of you, this is sort of a refresher because we've worked with a lot of you. And thank you all so much for your partnership. So we are the Medical Legal Partnership for Children in Hawaii. This is a photo from 1 million years ago at our 5-year anniversary, but we actually started in 2009 is when we saw our first patients together, patient clients, as we would say. So we've been going for a really long time. Hi, Dr. DeVilvis. Okay. So a quick overview. We are part of a national model. So there's a National Center for Medical Legal Partnership. It's called you can look up the website medical-legalpartnership.org. As of today, there are something like 400 different healthcare settings for MLPs. So we're not unique, but we are one of the best. And we literally have the awards to prove it. So, about 5 or 6 years into our collaboration, maybe 5 years, we actually won an award at the National Center. And I'm not just humble bragging here, but really, I think we won it because of our deep level of integration into the healthcare setting. And that's only possible because of KKV and the really special way that KKV works so closely with its patient communities. And so we're really, again, grateful for the partnership. You can see here that there are lots of different settings. They are mostly, I would argue, mostly community health settings. Like KKV, there's many coming up now at hospitals, a lot at children's hospitals. That's the origin of MLP, was at Boston Medical Center, the Boston Children's Hospital, I think. Mostly they are run by legal aid programs. And Hawaii does have some legal aid based collaborations with healthcare sites, I think. But we are one of the programs that is run through the law school. So the beauty of that is we have year-round students who can work with us, and we do so much more teaching and training, and also writing about MLP. So there's this kind of prevailing model that we like to say that we are like preventive lawyering to match the preventive healthcare system. So this is sort of the MLP National's way of looking at things. So I'll start with the bottom, actually. So the prevailing model of healthcare, we look at adverse social conditions affecting patient health, but they're difficult to address because we're not really looking upstream. We might refer to social workers and case managers in certain situations. So advocacy skills are valued and taught, but deployed inconsistently. So in the MLP model, the idea is that we're actually really addressing the social determinants of health that we're kind of prioritizing that. And I think that's something that KKV does so well already. And that we are fully integrated as healthcare, social work, legal teams working together to address those social determinants of health. And then again, that advocacy skills, that looking upstream, looking at policy solutions, both big picture policy and smaller internal policies, are just standard part of our care together. And similarly for legal help, we are often crisis driven. You think of the legal aid attorney, or I think of those like movies with legal aid attorneys where they're like ragged and they're in a crisis mode and they're running into court all the time for these last minute like eviction hearings and stuff. And that you're always thinking about court systems when you think about lawyers, and that it's very individualized. It's very one-on-one crisis intervention driven. But again, the MLP model is very upstream, looking at prevention, focusing with you folks on the early identification of the possible legal interventions. And then again, so working early to identify and then make referrals and address them, everything together. And because we're doing it upstream, we would rather not have to be in a crisis mode in court. We'd rather help resolve things with a phone call or with some self-advocacy tools to really stem things off before they become crisis, which ultimately improves health and well-being. And so we're all kind of seeing it in the same way. So we like to call ourselves doing, well, I'll just pop up this one. We really do like to say that we're doing preventive lawyering to match preventive medicine. So there are 3 components of what we do. And this is a graphic from like early MLP. They've kind of upped their graphics game along the way, but I like it because it shows how each of these components inform each other. So direct legal services. So at KKV, traditionally every Tuesday and Thursday, we run legal advocacy clinics in the afternoons to run alongside the KKV pediatric well-child checkup times. So that's the direct legal services. We also do, depending on what you call it, I often say it's interprofessional education, institutional education. So we're really trying to transform the entire practice together, that we are educating each other. We're doing things like this together. We're training up new professionals. And then the third piece that's huge is the policy and systemic advocacy work. And this is really critical. All MLPs across the nation are supposed to be doing this if they want to be branded as an MLP. Systemic advocacy work. For us, it's really about community engagement, working alongside the communities that we serve. And again, all of these pieces inform each other. So we're drawing on policy solutions from what we're seeing on the ground, from what we're seeing together, trying to train each other up. Like if I hear about some policy issue like the disability bus pass, right? How we work on it together, and then how we're pushing out the knowledge that we have and know to everybody else on the teams. So again, spotting the legal issues behind the health issues, thinking of lawyers as specialists, and really looking at, of course, there's a whole national network, but also just looking at really how do we do things better in our own neighborhoods. Okay, so what we do, what does this look like? Direct legal services. We will literally, Dr. T will knock on our door and say, hey, we have this patient who's facing this issue. We'll talk more about this later. And ideally, we're on site, of course, through the pandemic. We've been mostly doing this kind of exchange on Zoom. So, or at least it will kind of Zoom chat us and say, hey, can you help with XYZ that this patient is facing? I joke that our rooms are often very crowded because we often have an interpreter, a client, an interpreter, maybe the kids are in the room, maybe we have a law student in the room. And there's a lot of people, which also mirrors how a lot of KKV patient visits go, right? There are often more people in the room than are traditionally in the room for a medical appointment or legal appointment. Oh, and this rolly cart image is from the very, very early days of MLP, where I didn't have an office, and I literally had a rolly cart with my laptop and a portable printer and some files. And it really symbolizes to me the idea of we go where patients need us. And so the one-stop shop way that we work really just makes sense. So if we can meet with a patient in the exam room, or if we have to go to their home or do something that's just more accessible for them, it just makes sense rather than giving them a paper referral and saying, go talk to a lawyer, explain your problem in English and see if you can get help. We know that those kinds of referrals don't work very well. So this is just having it so integrated makes more sense. So just an idea of the kinds of things that we help with. I pull up these 2019 stats and 2020 stats just to show you what happened during the pandemic. A lot of the legal issues remain the same, but obviously our total caseload down here at the bottom doubled in the first year of the pandemic. Our housing cases, just in terms of hard numbers, tripled. As you can imagine, we'll talk a little more about the specific topics later, but housing is obviously always a huge part of what we do. Family law is usually the next big area. Public benefits grew a lot, obviously, but addressing both things like food stamps and just general welfare benefits for families, as well as we've actually increasingly had a lot more SSI cases recently. We've had an immigration attorney on. We had an immigration attorney for a couple of years as doing a postgrad fellowship. But really most of our immigration work now is not so immigration, but vital documents focused, and especially for Micronesian patient clients. And then consumer protection is a big area, another area, and a lot of stuff overlaps with civil rights matters, employment and some education. And I also want to make a note that a lot of these issues overlap. So these are just stats that I have on the presenting issue, we call it. So sometimes something comes in as a housing issue, that's how it gets categorized. But when we start talking, it's actually a guardianship for a kid, and that's the solution. So it actually becomes a family law issue, but it might get categorized in something else. So there's a lot of overlap that happens and multiple issues that happen. So this is just looking at it as a pie chart. Housing, again, always big. Housing, family law, and public benefits are usually our biggest areas. Along the way, we've also developed a lot of what we call MLP alerts, where we try to get out quick information about something. These were especially, we did a lot of these during the pandemic, so we could put them out on Facebook or share them with our partners. Things like ways to get your I-94, being aware of fraud and scams, because that became, again, really prevalent during the pandemic. So just putting out quick alerts, and also being able on the key ones to put them out in different languages. So we had them in Chuukese and Marshallese, for example. So the second piece of what we do, training each other together across professions. We brought in trainings for domestic violence, this is like Hawaii Disability Rights Center. Having our students come and present too. We shared a poster that the students had helped create for a conference, and doing check-ins with each other, right? Like I know sometimes the pediatric team will identify like, oh, we're seeing a lot of people asking about this service, or we're seeing a lot of, DDD services where they're not getting an interpreter. And then we'll be able to tell them, oh, we're seeing a lot of housing letters go out. So your families who are living at KPT, can you check in and see if they've gotten any letters? So just a way that we can do these check-ins with each other is really helpful. And again, some images from our systemic advocacy work, really being in the community, really reshaping narratives also, because I think a lot of the Micronesian patients and clients that we serve are often so much the targets of discrimination in their daily lives in all aspects, that a lot of what we've done as communities working together is combating a lot of those stereotypes by promoting like positive stories and amazing work that we can do together. So this is a picture of our COFA CAN, one of these over 10 years ago that we started, COFA Community Advocacy Network, really spearheaded by our friend, the late Jojo Peter, but to really address some of the systemic advocacy pieces, but really also as a way for us to get to know each other better so that our work was that much stronger together. Okay, other pieces, community education, working, the bottom picture is from Amanina's sewing program. We did a whole series of advocacy academy workshops, we called them, where we really built up people's self-advocacy. It's actually a picture of somebody, one of the participants working on her interpreting skills. So she was practicing interpreting during the class with us, but really teaching people about their rights and how things work, even touching on policy matters, and partnering a lot with other nonprofits to do this work. I guess one quick example of this advocacy academy, one of the things that we had trained on when we were talking about family law and public benefits is that when people get public benefits for their kids. So they get TANF, temporary aid for needy families called, which is very common for our families, especially living in KPT and public housing. They'll qualify for TANF for their kids. And if the parents are not living together, TANF will trigger, the welfare office will trigger a child support action against the non-custodial parent. And it's not always clear to the family applying that that's happening. So if you report we're not living together for whatever reason, it might most likely will trigger a child support action. Now, what happens is sometimes that family member was not apart because of a separation. They were always contributing to the family. And maybe we've had this happen where the family was like, oh no, my husband had to leave for like 3 months because a family member was sick back home in Chuk. So they went back home. They were gone for 3 months, maybe longer. They came back. We reported that they came back. But what they didn't know was that that separate child support action that got triggered kept going. So all along, child support, which is another state agency, was accruing all this, oh, he's supposed to be paying child support and he hasn't been paying. So we've had families have suddenly, when they get a job, the money's taken out of their paycheck. Why is this money being taken? Sometimes they're an intact family again. But if they hadn't fixed it on the second agency, it doesn't get fixed. So that's really become so common that we'll talk about it in meetings and people are like, the light bulb goes off. Oh, okay. And then we talk about the policy. Why does this happen? It happens because the state wants its money back, as crass as that sounds. Welfare isn't always just free. I mean, we pay into it and all of that, but they actually will take the child support money that's supposed to go to the mom and the kids for the kids, and they'll take the money to repay themselves, the state, for the welfare money they're giving to the family. And it's often not very big sums of money, but that's how it works. I don't like the policy, but that's what the policy is. And it's important for us to know those things. And it's important for families to know, just because I updated my information with the welfare office doesn't mean it gets updated to child support. So they'll talk to each other to trigger the action, but they won't talk to each other to update the information. Frustrating. But when we can explain that and walk people through it, then it's like, oh, and then they open are like, they know 3 other people that's happened to. So these kinds of self-advocacy, not just fixing one person's problem, but taking that as a lesson to teach other people, talking about the policy issue, it actually unfolds a lot more solutions and a lot more engagement with the people that we're serving. So sorry, that was a long example, but I just wanted to share that as a bigger example. So another policy issue, obviously, we worked a lot over the years on Medicaid for Micronesian communities, for people under COFA status. There were roller coaster rides with the lawsuit. There was a big Basic Health Hawaii lawsuit. Gosh, look at that, almost 10 years ago. A big loss in the Ninth Circuit that this meeting at KPT was actually a response to. A lot of community advocacy along the way. This is a photo of KKV. I think Senator Hirono's office, gosh, this was so 2013 or something, had reached out to David, said, hey, can I talk to you about some immigrant, legal issues, community issues? And he said, and he reached out to me and other people. He said, can we make this more about Micronesian communities, invite people from the community, and turned it into building all these relationships with community leaders themselves, to the point where like that issue became so part of Senator Hirono's advocacy efforts along the way that finally in 2020, she was able to win Medicaid restoration for people here under COFA status. Huge, huge, huge help for us. And I just really appreciate that a lot of that in my mind started because people at KKV, David and others, reached out and said, this is important. We need to include Micronesian community folks who are impacted, who are working on these issues, and really bring them all together with her. And that's what kept the issue alive. So I would also say that just highlighting that there were articles in Civil Beat that really recognized this kind of shared advocacy that we all did, people on this call too, did together along the way to have these really significant years long, but victory in the end. So I really appreciate that. Another quick example of policy work, I-94 documents. I'm sure you all have had patients who've like lost their passport in their I-94, or something happened or something's outdated and doesn't matter, like just all kinds of vital document challenges that this community has. So we've worked also with the community for years on improving access to I-94s, and just figuring, they finally made them electronic on the CBP website, the Customs Border Patrol, or whatever it's called, agency. And then finally, just last year, because of advocacy with Senator Hirono's office again, we got a commitment from the CBP that they would make everything electronic, including the really, really old ones. They would never expire because they were giving them time limit. So huge policy victory that has a direct impact on so many of our patient clients. So now when we have people who are like, they lost their I-94, they couldn't get a job, they couldn't finish their insurance information, everything, now we can send them back and say, go look online again. And most times they'll be able to find it. And if they can't, we can do some special advocacy, but huge fix across the board. And I would just like to highlight, because I'm so proud of this article, that Senator Hirono in this article had said that she had met at the Department of Homeland Security about the I-94 issue because of the urging of MLP. And so it was because we had worked together with communities that we had submitted a formal letter to her, but also that advocacy along the way. Her office was working with us for years along the way. So I really appreciated her acknowledging this, but also it shows a lot of the behind the scenes work that we're doing to make sure that these issues are kept alive. We're not here to take all the credit for it, but we really want to make sure these issues stay alive together, all of us working together. So that's the MLP in a nutshell. I hope that was okay with the timing. And then Alicia's going to walk us through this awesome referral infographic. And I have it blown up too. So it goes like, so you can look at the pretty infographic. And I think we have posters in KKV, but I'll turn it over to you, Alicia.
All right. Thank you, Dina. So this graphic was made a long time ago, but that's my little head. Can you blow up my little, yeah, thank you. So, you know, when you're in the exam room and you're talking about SDOH with families, there's a mnemonic that I think the original Boston Children's folks came up with, and it's like the I help mnemonic. So it's the things we're always asking about, like income. Are you having trouble making ends meet? Housing? Are you having trouble paying your rent? Where are you living? Questions about education come up all the time in pediatrics, but probably also for young adults or any adults. Legal status, like Dina is just talking all about the COFA and vital docs issues. Literacy, again, is something that we talk a lot about in peds, but adult literacy is also really important. And then personal safety is like your DB kind of questions. So when those kind of things come up, you know, a lot of us are pretty good at helping connect people to other programs at KKV, but sometimes you're like, really, I don't know. That sounds like there's something else that is not really something that fits into a different referral. Then maybe you start thinking, oh, this might be actually a legal problem. Let's see the next slide. So that's when you know, maybe you're not sure, but you want to talk to one of the lawyers so you can get them on the phone. Well, we'll talk about that on the next slide. But then basically you kind of do a curbside like you would with a specialist, right? So, you know, when we do curbsides, we don't want to share the information right away because you don't want to establish a patient relationship with the specialist if you don't know if they're going to take the referral, right? You're just asking for kind of advice. Is this something you could help with? So same thing with the lawyer. You kind of say, oh, this is my question. This is my problem. Does that sound like something's going wrong? And then they'll say, oh yeah, that's definitely a legal issue. Or maybe not. Maybe they'll say, actually, maybe you should call this other agency, or here's a quick fix that you can probably do without our help. But they'll definitely always give you advice. Next slide. So if it is something that the lawyers think, yes, this needs to be addressed with the help of a lawyer, the first step that they have to do is something called a conflict check. And this part can seem a little bit frustrating, but it's really important for the legal ethics that, you know, lawyers aren't representing people who are on opposite sides of things. And I remember a really specific case, like when I first started and I was like, but nobody else can help this family. But it was because there was like a child who was living with one side of the family, but the other side of the family was being represented by the lawyers. So it really would not make sense for them to have the same lawyer, right? So that's really important that that conflict check happen. And then, again, if there is a conflict, then the MLP staff can also suggest other legal options like legal aid, or there's a few other programs. If it's DV related, DVAC is an awesome resource that has legal help too. So they'll always point you in another direction if they can't help, but it's relatively rare, I would say. Okay, and then we do the warm handoff. So warm handoff is really critical. It's harder with COVID, but there's still some ways to make it better. And we're moving towards reintegrating on site for the summer. But the main issue with that is the MLP office, if you guys have ever seen it, is like the size of a closet. And like Dina was talking about, with the number of people that come with our families and that are needed in the room, it's just not safe, and it doesn't have a window, and there's no ventilation. So we have to figure out a bigger meeting space, but that requires also consideration of privacy, and we're all strapped for space at KKV, so we're working through that issue. But hopefully this summer they'll be back on site like 1 half day a week. Okay, next slide. Okay, so what can you do as a provider? So definitely you can screen for any unmet needs. Encourage and help patients to seek support resources. So again, Dina mentioned like the self-advocacy piece is really important, because when you help one family figure that out, they're gonna spread that to everybody else in the community too, and their other family members. One of the things that you probably know lawyers need is documents. So like they can't really help with a rent issue if they don't have the lease, right? So, and the same thing, like, vital documents that a family might need to do legal paperwork, like power of attorney. So they need to have those documents before they meet with the lawyer. So you can try to kind of figure out what they need and ask them to bring whatever they have, bring it with you when you meet the lawyer. Encourage them to take notes when they're talking to people. So if you called the SSI office, and who did you talk to? When did you call? What did they say? Try to write that down, because that's all like evidence that can be used later on to help with issues. Consulting, we just talked about, and making referrals. The phone number to best reach Fernando is there, and then also the email. And then we want you all to be medical champions for MLP and make referrals and reach out for help when you need it.
Can I just add one thing?
Yes.
So this phone number, I've learned, is actually, we added an intake person who speaks Chuukese. So his name is Filios. You might know him already. And he's been answering this phone in part because we had a lot of calls from Chuukese speaking people who kind of wanted to make an appointment or needed some quick intake. And it was really hard for us to bounce back and forth. Filios has been really good about taking messages, shuttling information between us, and also the MLPC at kkv.net, which we took forever to get. But now that we have it, so Fernando and Deja are both checking that very regularly. That's been super helpful for us. So just wanted to clarify that. And then the thing about taking notes, it's totally okay for people to take notes in their home language or document however they can. They could use a record function on their phone and just remind themselves like, oh, it's this date and I met with this person. Sometimes we even have people like, not everyone has a smartphone. I totally recognize that more than anyone. But if people do and they need a copy of their document, they can always take a picture. Like I submitted this form, but I'm going to take a picture of the cover letter or the cover page of the application. And so it has a timestamp of the day that I dropped it off or something like that. It just, all those little things are actually evidence in the long run. So I love to encourage people that they don't have to feel intimidated by, oh, I don't know how to take notes in English, they can find other ways to do it. So I just wanted to, and keeping text messages and things like that are also evidence. Oh,
Okay, this is an important slide. So there are a few things that wouldn't be appropriate for MLP to take on. So one, of course, is medical malpractice, because then we're supposed to be working together collaboratively. So it doesn't really make sense if the lawyer is suddenly like, Dina's suddenly against me. That would be so scary, right? So they don't do medical malpractice. We also do not do criminal cases because defendants do get public defenders, and so we stay away from those. Child welfare cases, same like medical malpractice, because we would end up oftentimes on the opposite side, because we may be called to, as mandatory reporters, we may be called to testify. And again, parents who are in the child welfare system, if a case does go to court, they also get someone to defend them. And then fee generating cases, so that's like personal injury and civil claims, are usually not cases that we take, but a lot of times our lawyer will do like an initial like intake and kind of see like, is like, I just had a child who had a burn at a restaurant, and the family wanted to pursue getting action against the restaurant, because mostly because of the way the restaurant treated them. And then so they met with Fernando for a few visits and kind of like figured things out, and then he referred it on to a personal injury attorney who is going to be helping them. So that's kind of how that process could work. So this one, that another lawyer can come up, because sometimes families they may have a lawyer through like legal aid, but maybe they didn't understand that they have one. But then you're kind of like figuring out, oh, I talked to this other person who's helping me. So it's not appropriate. It's kind of like having two PCPs, right? So you can't have two pediatricians or two family docs, because that just doesn't work, because you have two people trying to fix the same problem. And then the MLP lawyers, sometimes this comes up, are not KKV lawyers. So like, as much as I'd like Dina to like look at my contract or help me when like child welfare is calling me, like that's not really their place to be our lawyer, right? Or to help us like prepare for a case in court or things like that.
Wow, you did that better than a lawyer, Alicia. That was great.
Thank you.
But again, as she gave in those examples, for some of these things, like even criminal cases, we've spent a lot of time with people helping them understand how to work with lawyers. So we'll often sit down with them anyway and say, we can't help you because you have a lawyer, probably a public defender already, but we're happy to like help you. Here's a notebook, take notes, how to like work with an attorney. So we're willing to do that. And then as she also shared, you'll see in the next slide, personal injury shows up on this of what we actually will help with, partly because Fernando expanded my perceptions. I was always like, no personal injury. And Fernando did such great work with some of these cases, exactly how Alicia explained. Oftentimes, if it started, that example like started off as an insurance matter. So if it's an insurance issue that we want to make sure everyone is doing what they're supposed to be doing and following the rules around insurance companies' involvement. But then at a certain point, if someone's going to sue personally, then we would refer out. But as she was saying, like, because so many people just don't have access to legal help at all, Fernando spent a lot of time working up a case like that to make sure that they had all the documents ready to go, that we assessed the case properly, that they understood where they were at with the insurance providers, so that he could hand it off to another private attorney. Because quite honestly, a lot of attorneys don't want to touch a case unless they think they can make money off of it. And so it really helped. There's been several cases like that where Fernando spent a lot of time sort of, we call it packaging the case for them. And he knows that it doesn't, not that it doesn't count for us, but that it's a lot of extra time for him, but he's willing to do it because he knows the family won't get help otherwise. So feel free to do a curbside question with us if those things come up. But I think we're going to jump into our primary legal issues that we do most commonly address. So do you want me to go through these?
I was just gonna say, like, for the criminal issue, like you'll find that comes up in other aspects. So right, if there's a child in the family or another family member who is in trouble, then it can jeopardize housing. So you may think originally it's a housing issue, family's about to be evicted, and then, oh, it turns out it's actually that this other family member is in trouble. So sometimes things just overlap. All the time things overlap. What am I talking about? All the times things overlap. Lives are really complicated. So you may not necessarily know right away, and that's okay, because the lawyer will figure that out and do their due diligence to handle the parts that they can and not touch the parts that aren't appropriate, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so housing, like I said from the top, housing, family law, and public benefits are often the most frequently needed issues. Obviously, we've been doing a lot of eviction defense, but within that, there's a lot of things like people just need rent adjustments at public housing. They should be able to ask for them anytime if their income goes down or up. If their income goes up between their annual reviews, they actually should not have to have a rent increase until their annual review. But if their income goes down, they can ask anytime for a rent adjustment. They should do it in writing. They should confirm it all. Sometimes people just go to the front desk and say, oh, I told them I lost my job. They said, don't worry about it. And then they got the same rent bill every month. So we're happy to look at those. That's a huge part of what we do. Housing, reasonable accommodations, habitability concerns, occupancy issues that often come up in terms of their renewing their leases, discrimination, language access issues, transitional housing and shelter concerns. We've done a lot of homeless advocacy, navigating these systems along the way. In fact, Fernando and Deja, in about 10 minutes, will be starting something around a presentation around affordable housing issues and some of the redevelopment stuff that's going on in Kalihi and how that overlaps with some of the transitional housing navigating issues. Family law, a lot of power of attorney, guardianship and adoption questions, some advanced planning, which we want to do more of. Domestic violence issues come up a lot. Divorce and custody and child support, we will help give some general advice. We cannot take on a full-blown divorce case or a custody case because those are very time-consuming cases, and it would be all we did if we even took on a handful of those. But we're happy to talk to people, give them some general advice, help understand what other resources might be out there. Legal Aid used to do really good divorce workshops where they would help people fill out the paperwork. So things like that, we can definitely direct people towards. Public benefits, again, anything related to food stamps, welfare, TANF, even applying for MedQuest, which I know we're all going to be jumping on board with this year, general assistance for people without children, federal benefits. Deja's been doing a lot of social security work recently. And I actually do want to add on that topic, I have a note here, a reminder from Deja. Deja reminded us there have been lots of errors and problems with Social Security application requests. So she said, please keep an eye out and feel free to refer them over if you have a patient who's complaining about a denial or paperwork that they just haven't heard anything back on. She said that there have been a lot of paper reviews that have been delayed because they moved everything online. So she had clients who had properly submitted all of their paperwork, and it was just sitting there in a file that nobody was reviewing. And she's also caught some huge errors in calculating benefits, like in the tens of thousands of dollars. So she's happy to look at those issues. There's all these terrible statistics that Social Security benefit applications, like more than half of them are just denied out of hand. So you almost always have to appeal those cases. It's just a terrible system. It's a very broken system, but we're happy to look at those. So just want to give a heads up. We're going to be focusing a bit on education law this summer because a lot of issues have come up around special ed and IEP concerns, language access, discrimination again in education, looking at responses to bullying and discipline issues. We're going to try to look more at some transition planning to kids facing adulthood, but maybe could stay in DOE services longer. Also the intersection with DDD, Developmental Disabilities Division. So just want to flag that for folks. Employment, consumer protection, and public benefits often intersect. But any kind of wrongful termination, unemployment benefits, disability accommodations, workers' comp, we've had not too many, but breastfeeding accommodations have come up. And all of these things are now the law, so it's super important. There's also domestic violence accommodations that are required in the workforce. So all of those things we're happy to look at. Consumer protection issues, tax questions, which we're not tax experts, but we can look at paperwork together with people, help direct them in the right place. We have a really great, I have a really great colleague who's a tax professor at our law school, and a lot of really great students who want to do more clinical work. Insurance, debt, scam, fraud kind of issues that come up. Immigration, vital documents issues. Of course, we talked about I-94s already, passport issues. We have a pretty good relationship with the FSM and the Marshall Islands consulates, offices. Happy to look at stuff with them. And then again, with examples like the personal injury or criminal law cases even, we're happy to talk to you about what's an appropriate referral and happy to talk, help families navigate some of these issues along the way. Okay. I don't know if Alicia wants to address some of these, but I can keep going until you come back.
Oh, I'm here.
Oh, okay.
Okay, what I was gonna say for this slide is, well, we already talked about what things not to refer, but really, 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 if you're not sure, just think of it like a curbside. We do that all the time with our specialists, right? We're not necessarily gonna send a full-blown referral, but we just have a quick question. So definitely feel free to do that. We talked about the conflict of interest. I know it can be a little bit frustrating, but it's really, really important. We already talked about that. Yeah, so conflicting out, it may be that they've encountered them in a different or related manner and they're not allowed to help with this one. Or if there's another lawyer already, like I said, you can't have two PCPs. And then there are confidentiality issues, so they may not be able to tell you, right? So if they say, sorry, we can't, there's a conflict, we have to just kind of respect that they may not be able to tell you why. A lot of times we are really used to like information flowing really easily between us. That's why we're so integrated in our collaboration, but there can be times where they have to respect certain confidentiality rules too. And then Dina already talked about the phone number to Filios, and then don't be shy to leave voice messages because a lot of times they may be on another line or in another client meeting. So that may be what you have to do is leave a voicemail or an email.
Yeah, thank you. And on the conflict issues, just a related note. So we're also trained up on HIPAA confidentiality issues, and our legal ethics are probably even stricter than HIPAA. But we also have an agreement between KKV and MLP, and we ask clients who are active clients to sign an agreement that basically gives us, allows us to talk to each other. So we say, can we talk to other people, including the doctors who can help you, right? Because I think all of these confidentiality rules are designed to protect the patient clients. And so certainly we can talk when we have the permission, but it's also the best practice for all of us to be double check all the time. So we try to remind ourselves to ask the patient, is it okay if I share this with your provider? And you can do the same. Is it okay if I share this with the lawyer? Just so that we are constantly kind of reminding the patients that we are talking to each other. And in really sensitive issues like domestic violence issues, sometimes a patient might want to keep stuff confidential. So they might ask us not to share something or vice versa. So just, I like that practice thing of trying to remind each other to ask the patients frequently to kind of renew their consents and stuff. I think this is our last.
Yeah. So we already touched on a lot of this, but I just wanted to point out that referrals go better if you're really doing a warm handoff. It is hard with COVID, but just giving the patient the phone number for the lawyer often doesn't work. And just kind of think about sometimes how reluctant, like, you know, even myself, like I'm reluctant to, oh, I got to call this doctor's office and make an appointment. Like, it's just, it's hard to find the time. It's annoying to have to sometimes make phone calls when you got your kids around you. And so there's that issue. Also, just sometimes lawyers sound scary. I mean, even though they're not, but like calling a lawyer, like if, you know, I actually don't have a lawyer, I need to do my events planning, but, you know, like doing that like sounds scary. And so, I think for our patients, it's even more so. The language barriers can be huge. Like we have Filios who answers the phone now, but for other languages, you know, that's not going to work. So definitely if you can help out and make that first phone call with them, or have someone on your team help them, that would be really, really helpful.
I just want to emphasize that what Alicia just said. If we're not around, I love the idea of calling with them, even if you leave a message together. Like we're much more inclined to be able to responsibly follow up if the call, even if it's from you, and say, I am sitting here with my patient so and so, and they, you know, asked to make this referral, can you please call them back? Because if you call us and say, hey, I have a patient who we've never met or talked about, and can you just call them because they need help with XYZ? It's not good practice for us because we're technically not supposed to be cold calling prospective clients, even if we're not making money off of them. It's kind of against our ethic rules. But also in our experience, those have never been successful referrals, especially around things like DV. You may think someone's in crisis and they need our help, but if they're not making the call, 9 times out of 10, and this has just been true in our lives, they'll often be like, oh, I don't know what they're talking about, or oh no, I don't need help. Like if they didn't initiate it, they often won't follow up. So those are just some tips of how to work with them.
And then we've been mentioning this before, but kind of think of the lawyer as a specialist. So provide some background information so that they know what the question or need is. This is again why the cold calls don't work, because a lot of times families have a hard time explaining what it is they need help with. Like they come in to see you and they bring a piece of paper and they say, oh, I got this from housing. And then if you just say, oh, call the lawyer about housing, that's kind of like telling them to call the nephrologist and ask about the kidney, right? It's really, really broad, and it doesn't help anyone figure out what the need is or what the question is. Talked about language barriers already, and then we talked about this in another slide, but just when you do set them up with the appointment, help them know what they'll need to bring to that appointment, and what, you know, encourage them to take notes. So that can be more helpful for everybody's time.
Yeah. Oh, look, questions. So does anyone have?
I hope this
Thank
was
you. It was
helpful.
great.
Yeah.
That's great.
I know
Thanks
I
so
was
much.
hoping we'd have more time to like just have questions of like potential curbsides or things like that. But feel free to reach out about any questions you guys have. And then also for the future talks, we have 2 more that Laura has graciously given us for this year. So if you have topics that you really, really want to hear the lawyers talk about, then please let me know, email me so I can set that up.
Yeah, if any of the legal issues we addressed you want more info on, we're happy to come back. And then also bringing Fernando and Deja, because then you can kind of meet, for those of you who haven't already, meet them more face-to-face also would be great. Thanks, everyone. And yes, we do prioritize peds, but we're happy to take curbsides from anyone. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Nope, just saying thank you. Aloha.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.